Welcome to Becoming Limitless. This is the podcast for entrepreneurs who want to optimize their brain and their body with biohacking. I'm going to teach you how to eliminate brain fog and upgrade your health so you can have more productivity, energy, and growth in your business. I'm your host, Tanessa Shears. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Becoming Limitless podcast. I have a question for you. Have you ever struggled with that feeling of failure, or you're hesitant to try something because you're worried about, ooh, what if I fail? I hate dealing with that. I don't enjoy it. Well, in today's episode of the Becoming Limitless podcast, I have expert mental performance coach Kimberly Jarman coming on. And we're talking about a term that she coined called rejection resilience. Now, this is not only going to apply to your health, but it's going to apply to your business so that you can have tangible, actionable tools on how to deal with failure, on how to deal with rejection, on all the negativity that comes up. So in the beginning of the episode here, you're going to hear us talk about a bit more of the science stuff. So the neurochemicals that are involved in us and our ability to handle rejection. Then what's going to happen is you're going to hear us then go through the entire process of fear of rejection and that failure and everything that comes up from the feelings you get. Then what do we do? And I'm going to be walking you through with Kim, and we're going to go together through a step-by-step process of something you can do when you are ever in the face of feeling rejection, doubt, shame, fear, any of those feelings that keep you from moving forward in your health, with your energy, or with your business. And what we're going to wrap up with at the end is a very clear picture of what is on the other side of this journey, like what it is truly like to feel freedom and lack of attachment around fearing failure and not winning at everything, right? We want you to be able to approach your life and your business with excitement and not from a place of worrying about what the result might be and what you're going to make that mean about yourself. So this is such a good episode. I had a great time diving into all of the little pieces and components and asking her the how-tos and digging on everything. And I know you are going to love it. So let's jump into this episode with Kimberly Jarman, all about rejection resilience. All right, Kim, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here. We're talking about the brain. That's our favorite topic on this podcast. We love talking about the brain because it's the best asset that we have in our business, right? Our brain is what is responsible for the vision, for creating the products, for being great coaches, for being great CEOs. And so we love to talk about that. And if ever I can bring in experts that really help us understand our brain more, how it works, and how we can be in charge of the results we get, and not always that default brain, because sometimes when we are in fight or flight, or there is a stress going on, sometimes we lose control of that prefrontal cortex, that brain that makes the decisions for our future, right? So Kim, do you want to introduce yourself? Let us know who you are. How do you help people? Go for it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today. So I'm Kimberly Jarman. I'm a mental performance coach for women. So I help them reach their full potential with neuroscience-based mindset and biohacking their brain chemicals and their hormones so they can reach that full potential. They can think at a higher level, right? Like think clear, faster, get out of that brain fog, out of that like lack of focus, right? So they can achieve the goals that they want. So yeah, that's what I do and who I help.
I love that. You said all those words that light up our brain over here. You said biohacking, you said brain fog. So we're in a good place. So I'm so curious, like what got you into this field? What led you to be interested in neuroscience and brain hacking?
My own dumpster fire of life. So my master's degree is in counseling. And, as a good student, I went and got therapy because that's what they ask us to do in grad school. And I was struggling with depression and anxiety. I'm a pretty high performer. I never felt successful. Like nothing was ever enough, right? I never had that feeling in my body that I had arrived. Um, and therapy wasn't really working for me. Like I just continually like kind of battled. And then I found coaching and I learned the model that my thoughts create my emotions chemically. And then my emotions drive my actions and my actions create the results of my life. And I was like, what? Grad school never taught me this. No therapist has ever taught me this. You're telling me that my thoughts are creating my emotions, right? And when I learned that, it was just like, it was life changing for me, to be honest with you. Like, oh, the other humans aren't creating my emotions,
Yes.
right? And like these emotions are chemically created in my brain. Um, and then from there, like I was in coaching and like I noticed some of the people in my cohort were like progressing faster than me. Right? Like I would keep running into some walls in my coaching and my thought work part. And one day, my best friend's my business partner. We were doing a podcast together and I was obsessed with Elon. And I was just like, what makes him different from the rest of us? Right? Like if the model tells me that our thoughts create our results, what makes him so different that he's so successful? And Carmen's brilliant. And she just looked at me and she was like, oh, well, it's serotonin. Like serotonin is a self-confidence chemical, and if it's not like balanced, it's really hard to like access self-confidence. And it's also the rejection resilience chemical. So like Elon, and she was telling me this, she's like, Elon, like he will hit failure or he'll hit rejection. And it's just a little bit easier for him to like, okay, that sucked. Let's move on. She's like, for a lot of people that serotonin's not balanced, rejection is devastating. And that really resonated with me because I owned a CrossFit gym before I became a coach. And every time an athlete would leave, it felt like they were breaking up with me. And it would take me days, like, to, like, kind of overcome that. 'Cause it felt so devastating. And for me, that clicked. It was like, this is where the mental health industry is failing us. Right? Like I can't thought work my way out of like regulated serotonin levels. I can't like go into therapy and talk my way like to get regulated serotonin levels, right? Like it's an uphill battle. And then I started diving into the science of it and like what 95% of our serotonin is produced in our gut. And when serotonin like in our body, it's like the Goldilocks syndrome. Like it can't be too much or can't be too little. So when we have too much serotonin, it creates like an anxiety feeling in our body. And when we have too little serotonin, it feels like anxiety in our body.
Mm.
So like yeah, like no wonder it was so hard for me to like have rejection resilience back then. No wonder it was so hard for me sometimes to like access that self-confidence. And you look at other people and like, why is it so easy for them?
Oh,
Long answer to your
no,
question.
I love that. So let's break it. Let's dive into that a little bit. So this idea of serotonin, I think we've surface heard of the word, and I know that we've heard of like serotonin maybe is lacking if we're feeling depression and stuff like that. But like, what actually is serotonin?
So it's a neurotransmitter, right?
Mhm,
Like it's a chemical within, I mean, it's throughout our whole body, right? But it is you have in your brain, you have these neurons like that fire as we have a thought.
mhm,
And then that firing releases serotonin in our brain. And so it allows certain parts of our brain to fire up and certain access to certain neural pathways, right? And we have regulated neuro or serotonin, it's easier for us to create those neural pathways that I just said at a faster rate, ones that serve us, right? Like
mhm,
that, let me kind of break that down. Ones that serve us, meaning creating thoughts and beliefs
mhm.
that allow us to create an emotion like self confidence, right? Where we feel brave, we feel safe within ourselves to go take the actions we need. Does
Got
that
it.
make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah. So serotonin, we have this chemical too much. We feel anxious, not enough. We feel depressed and sad and maybe lack of motivation. So I imagine, for the most part, we're probably born with an adequate amount of serotonin. What
Yeah.
then happens over our lives to get us into this state of too much serotonin or not enough serotonin?
Yeah, I love that question, and I feel like you probably know the answer to the question too. Um, there's 2 things, like, and what is it? Is it chicken or the egg, right? Like, you see it a lot in kids that they don't have good gut health. So
Mm,
that's whether that's, like, they weren't breastfed or, like, they've had a ton of antibiotics, like, whatever it is, or their diet is a super processed diet, right? Like, 95% of our serotonin is produced in our gut. So if
mhm,
we don't have good gut health, our body can't absorb the nutrients it needs to create these enzymes, these cofactors,
mhm.
right? Like we look at, I know off the top of my head right now for dopamine. Let's switch over to that neural pathway. So dopamine requires vitamin C as a cofactor to convert into norepinephrine,
Mhm.
right? Well, vitamin C is also a cofactor that's in high demand to build cortisol. So if our body is taking in these nutrients, but it's not able to absorb it, right? Or we're not taking in enough nutrients, we don't have the cofactors, the building blocks to build these neurochemicals, these hormones. Um, and so we have that part, the gut health, but then we have stress, chronic
Mhm.
stress, not just like acute, like I feel stress once in a while, like chronic stress. Well, we
So
all
you
know
mean being
chronic,
an entrepreneur?
right? A human. Yeah.
Yeah, right?
So it's that chronic stress, like it destroys our gut health. It creates systemic inflammation,
Mhm.
right? And I'm going to nerd out just for a minute on this. Okay. So if we look, I wish I had a chart, but nobody would want to like go through this. Chronic stress is it? So cortisol is a sex hormone.
Mhm.
Progesterone, right, converts over into cortisol, and progesterone also converts down into our sex hormones.
Mhm.
Okay. So when we're chronically stressed, the body says reproduction is not primary, it's not important. Something is causing our survival to not to be threatened. So we're going to downregulate sex hormone production and we're going to prioritize cortisol production, right? Well, here's the kicker. Estrogen has a relationship with dopamine. So now we've downregulated estrogen. So we're downregulating our dopamine, right? And
Mhm.
so cortisol is in high production. Well, cortisol, like I said, requires a lot of vitamin C. So we're also
Mhm.
pulling from the other neurochemicals that need vitamin C to be made. So we're downregulating production of serotonin, we're downregulating production of dopamine. And by the way, serotonin is the precursor to melatonin.
Mhm. Which then
So
disrupts
once,
sleep.
yeah, so
Yeah.
now we're in this vicious negative cycle.
Yes.
And we're staying in chronic stress, like you pointed at the beginning of this, right? We're staying in our primal brain, in that limbic system. And there was a study in the 1970s on baby monkeys. Have you heard this study?
No.
Okay. So they took these baby monkeys from birth and they separated them from their mothers for 8 weeks. And they did MRIs on these baby monkeys' brains over the 8 weeks, right? And they saw where their prefrontal cortex started to shrink and their limbic brain, the primal brain, started to enlarge. Because when we live in chronic stress, the body shunts blood to different things. And so it was shunting blood to the prefrontal cortex and sending it to the limbic, the primal brain. So, because it's stressful to be pulled away from your mom as a baby, right?
Yeah.
And then after 8 weeks, they returned the baby monkeys to their mothers. They did another MRI every week, and they found that the brain returned, the prefrontal cortex returned to normal size, and the primal brain, the limbic brain, shrunk. So,
Okay.
again, when we're living in chronic stress, we're not able to access that prefrontal cortex that solves the problems, right? That's goal oriented, that's future oriented.
Mm.
And we start living out of that primal brain.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm understanding is that through childhood, even through adulthood, by intake of a ton of processed foods, overuse of antibiotics. I know birth control can deplete gut health, chronic stress. What we're do not able to do is absorb the nutrients from our gut as easily. Therefore, we barely have enough on hand, anyways. And then, because we are living in a stressed out state, stress is pulling all the nutrients that should actually go to things like progesterone, to things that help us balance our mood. And so not only are we literally starving for nutrients, but we're giving the few we have over to processes that are keeping us in this fight or flight state. Does that sound right?
Yes, you nailed it perfectly.
Oh, I love this because I'm always thinking like, okay, how can the listener here follow this pathway? So okay, so now we have all this effect that's done, and serotonin is out of balance. Let's just say.
Hmm. Hmm.
How does this show up in terms of like how we would show up to our business, for example? Like, let's give examples of if we have not enough serotonin or we have too much, how does that affect our business?
Yeah. So you're going to probably experience like this kind of like anxious state. Like I describe it. Maybe you can describe yours. I'll describe mine and then people can kind of find their journey. Like for me, it's like that butterflies in my chest, like, kind of,
Mm,
like, a little bit under, like, the bottom of my chest bone. It's like that butterfly tightness in my chest you just, like, wake up with, and,
mhm,
like, you can just never fully escape it. And then my brain, it was really hard for it to stay focused.
mm,
Like, it would, like, constantly, like, it was looking for the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, right? Or I'd get bored really quickly, brain fog,
yeah.
right? Problem solving. I would spin in indecision a lot or confusion,
Mhm.
right? Like, yeah, that's how I experience it.
Yeah, I think for me, anxiety is like a tightening in the gut. It's a shallowness and a shortness of the breath. It almost feels like the tube that connects your mouth to your stomach is called your esophagus. It tightens for me. I kind of get a
Mhm,
tightening all the way through down there. I notice that my thinking is rapid
mhm.
and very all over the place. Like that's
Yes.
that experience for me. It's not necessarily what is being said, but it's just like thought, 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 and they're not really related. And it's very jumpy, right? I feel this sense of like it's a quickening that's happening inside.
Yep.
That's that
Yeah.
experience for me. So in terms of like how it's affecting our business, I know for me, and like you said, boredom, distraction, not being able to stay focused, right? For me, it's the hide. Like I want to just, it's the freeze. I would just take the afternoon off. I want to eat something. I want to sit on the couch. I'll do this tomorrow. So for yours, it sounds almost like a paralysis. And for me, it's almost a retreat when we experience that. Does that sound
Yeah,
right?
I know a lot of women that hide, and I also know, like, for me, honestly, like, if we're being really super honest, like, what it is, it's not necessarily, like, paralysis, it's like so we call it A-line, right? I went through the model, right? Like, the thought creates the emotion that drives the action that creates the result. I'm an A-line girl. So when
Mhm.
you see me in that, it's like I'm like throwing spaghetti at all the walls and just taking all the actions. I'm never evaluating them to see if they're effective. I'm never evaluating them to see, like, is this moving? Are these needle moving activities? I'm just a to-do list of 50 things, and we're just like doing the 50 things, one thing or the other. And what I notice in my pattern is the things that are harder, that require a little bit critical thinking or decision making, they'll get put off. They'll keep getting put off, and all the tasky shit will get prioritized and done.
So like the lesser important stuff gets bumped to the
Oh,
top
yeah.
of the list because it gets, I think there's that little bit of the hit of getting little stuff done, even though it's not the needle moving stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when we have serotonin balanced, you said that we feel self confidence. And then this helps us with something, it's a term you coined called rejection resilience. Now, if we think about rejection, it's that idea of we do something, the
Mhm.
result doesn't go as planned, and so we feel the feeling of rejection, right? Or is
Yeah.
that like a self-created feeling of I'm not good enough, I didn't do the job? How
Yeah.
would you define rejection?
Rejection for me is like I kind of broaden it with like
Okay.
failure as well, right? Like things don't go as planned. I make the offers, they're not like they say no, or worse for me is being ghosted. Like it just goes into the void, right? Or like we execute something and then the results we get are not exactly how we wanted them. Like all of that, like this isn't how I thought this was going to go. This is not how I wanted it to go.
Yeah.
This is not the outcome that I wanted.
Okay, so we got rejection. How do you define resilience?
Resilience is the ability to like bounce back from it. Like we
Yeah.
want to make that window like super small
Mhm.
instead of being because we're all going to experience failure. We're all going to
Mhm.
experience rejection, right? As entrepreneurs. But some of us have like a really long window of like kind of spinning in that, right? That despair, that feeling of like defeated
Doubt.
or
That's my
discouraged.
flavor, doubt.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And, like, what we wanna do is create resilience to that and shorten that window that we experience those emotions, but we also want to be able to reframe things so we don't see them as rejection.
Ooh. So what is more important, the skill of learning how to reframe it or building your capacity to tolerate failure?
Both.
Ooh, okay. Okay. So I love the way you have framed this. I don't think I've ever thought about it before because I've we've done a lot of fails, financial fails, business fails. Like we've done $50,000 losses. Like we've had a lot of fails, but we move on very quickly. And I've never
Mhm.
actually been able to frame why that is and why we don't feel failure. But you said it perfectly. It's like when the failure or the rejection happens, how long do you spend spinning in the negativity before you pick yourself back up and experience the resilience? Do you think the length of time we spend spinning in that is correlated to how willing or unwilling we are to fail? Because I know I've got some clients and they're just, oh my gosh, if I said I want to do 30 days of doing this habit, what if I don't do it? I want to be perfect. And if I can't be perfect, that feels bad. So they don't set the goal. Do you think that's
Mhm.
tied to that, like that length of that time in there?
I think it's nuanced. Like, when I hear people say the statement of, like, the willingness to fail, it's like, I feel like it's general. Like, we have to, like, kinda dig behind that, right? Because there's things that set you up to be able to have that willingness to fail.
Okay, tell me more.
Okay.
I love this. This is interesting.
Um, well, I would just be interested, like, you have that willingness to fail, right? Um, I didn't, and I had to dig deep, like, why I didn't, and then, like, a lot of it is from my childhood wounds and my childhood coping mechanism that my little self picked that helped me make it through my family system, right? Which it was like, for me, it was control and drivenness to prove my worth. So
Mhm,
if I was gonna fail, that meant I was unworthy. So that was gonna be too painful for me to even set myself up in a place to fail.
mhm,
Right, and then also neurochemically, because I was estrogen dominant as a teenager, my first period, right? So that means that my serotonin was more than like it was off. I didn't have that like that innate kind of serotonin, self-confidence, rejection, resilience going on.
mhm.
So every failure felt so personal. It was another reminder I'm not worthy and I'm not enough.
And I imagine the more times you fail, does it get longer and longer and longer until you pick yourself back up every time until you learn the skills that, for example, you teach your clients?
Let me ponder that. Yeah, I think as the failures got bigger, they started stacking.
Yeah.
And then my brain started creating more evidence of like, you're not capable,
I love that
right?
word evidence. Yes, it's like, hey, before you had just failed twice, but now you've got
Mhm.
20 of them,
Mhm.
right? It's like what is and again, I've heard clients say this, what's the point? It's who I am and it develops an identity around that, right?
Yeah. And I want to like take a moment to like just debunk that. So the way the brain works is like a belief is a thought that we have thought over and over and over again, right? And it created a neural pathway of belief. So then our reticular activating system in our brain is a filter.
Mhm.
That filter only allows things into our awareness that validates beliefs. So if I have a belief that I am not capable, right, that I had since childhood, my brain has spent 3 decades, 4 decades, 4 decades of looking for evidence through my reticular activating system to show you're not capable. You're not capable. So now my brain has a file folder of evidence that my RAS has gathered to show that. But it's all subjective interpretation, right? Because it's like my brain has not even allowed me to see evidence to show that I'm capable. It won't allow it into my
Mm.
awareness, even though it exists and is out there.
Yeah, it reminds me of this. I heard my friend say something the other day. We were talking about emotional frequency and like the frequency of the emotional state you're vibrating at. And he said, the frequency you are at. So the frequency is what I frequently see. So
Oh, that's so good. Yeah.
right? So if you are vibrating from like emotionally sitting in, vibrating at whatever you want to call it, in a
Mhm.
place of shame or constant guilt or unworthiness, that is your frequency. It is what you will frequently see. You're calling in more. It's your brain is filtering out evidence to the contrary.
Yes, 100%.
Oh, okay, cool. So then let's say we're in this place right now where we have this stack of failures, maybe different flavors of failure. We've kind of got this like, I hate the feeling of not failing, or I don't like it. I avoid it. Where do we go next? Like we get it, our serotonin's out of balance. we're not working through failure at a way that is supporting their goals, going after our business dreams, whatever it is like that, where do we start? How do you begin getting your brain back into a healthy place?
Such a good question. Like, without making it overwhelming. I mean, it's gonna be from my perspective, honestly, and I think from your perspective, and that's why I love doing this podcast, is that you and I are so aligned, so it's amazing, so I'm super grateful. It's gonna be a multi-pronged approach, right? It's gonna have to be a mind and a body approach, right? Like, am I getting enough sleep? Am I eating healthy foods, right, that are supporting my body? But then it's also, excuse me, working on the mindset. Like, for me, what was really helpful is to redefine failure. And what failure was that my coach gave me and redefined it for me was failure is simply quitting. That's it.
Mhm.
If you don't quit, then you can never fail. Everything else is just running a science experiment. Here's my hypothesis. Here's my actions. I'm going to evaluate. Did it work? Did it not work? Okay, it did. Awesome. No, it didn't. Now I got to pivot a few actions. We're going to run it again. But because it gave me control,
Mhm.
right? Like, it put me back in the driver's seat of failure. It was like, okay, the only way I can fail is if I quit, and I can control whether I quit or not.
Mhm.
And then there's another acronym I love that's first attempt. Fail is like first attempt or first action. I can't remember it. I'll have to send it to you. But it's like it's the first action you take in learning. That's what it is. The first action in learning.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love that. Cool. Okay, so it sounds like reframing is a big part of the work that you do and like having that conversation with ourselves about what it means to fail. So when you start working with someone, what does the conversation sound like in their brain around failures when you start?
They're very resistant
What does
to
that mean?
failing.
Yeah.
They like we'll do a fail challenge, right? Because I
Oh.
know none of us want to like go fail. Like, that's not something like that feels good in our nervous system. So we'll start talking about failure. We'll redefine it, right? And then we'll have a fail challenge, like 30 days of like doing things that you know you're going to fail at, because I want them to start being able to like regulate their nervous system around that, right? Um, and so when I bring this up, they're like, I don't really want to do that. I'm like, well, your
Naturally.
goals are on the other side
Yeah.
of that, right? And like a lot of the people, like, we're mostly intellectual people. Like, we love learning, right? So then it's like rephrasing that to like, this is a learning opportunity for you. You get to learn, you get to grow, right? And again, like creating that safety in their nervous system
Mhm.
and like doing the work of like, this doesn't mean anything about you. Because I think that's why most of us are really resistant to failing, is because what we're going to make it mean about ourselves. So when I can have that conversation of like, self confidence is it's built in four pillars, right? It's trust yourself, believe in yourself, have your own back no matter what, and be willing to feel any and all emotions. So, in that third one, having your own back, is like, we're not going to trash talk ourselves. We're not going to throw ourselves under a bus.
Mhm.
We're not going to like doubt our decisions, right? Like, we made the best decisions we could at the time with the information we had. If
Mhm.
we'd have known better, we would have done better. So you may fail, but we are not going to trash talk ourselves. So then our brain can also feel safe with us because it knows we're not going to make it mean anything negative about us.
Yeah. Okay. I love this. So I'm imagining right now someone is listening to this. They're like, I get that. But in the moment, what do I do when my brain is like, ugh, you're terrible. Look, you failed again. Now you can't do anything. Like this feels awful. You shouldn't have done that. What's wrong with you? In the moment, what is the
Mhm.
first thing we should do to start breaking that cycle?
Yeah. For me, I have to go to my nervous system first.
Mm.
And so that means body approach first. So whether that's like running ice water over my wrist, or whether that's sitting down and doing a breath work, just breathing, slowing my breathing down, or going for a walk. Like, I have to go to the body first. From there, then I can have access to my prefrontal cortex.
Ooh, so what I'm hearing is you need to shake yourself out of the state that you are in, and sitting there and trying to outthink yourself is not going to be productive.
I have not met anyone that's been able to do it.
You know what's so funny? I have a plan to do a whole podcast on this, but I had this aha moment while I was in Panama a couple of months ago, and I was sitting out there and it was a sunrise and I just finished a yoga class and I was like, "Oh, I feel so good." And I was like so able to direct my thinking in that moment. And I remember thinking like, why do some people have such trouble directing their thinking and other people don't? And what I came to in that moment was like, I think when the body is in that state, like you said, of fight or flight nervous system on, you can't access that prefrontal cortex. It is shut down and your amygdala is running the show. It's all about emotions and like fear and all of that. And so, to your point, you said, go out for a walk, put cold water on my wrist. These are things that shake you out of your breath work. You need to get your body under control to get your brain back online.
Yes, yes. And I think personally, because I have vested interest into the veteran world, right? And we went from 22 veteran suicides a day to 31 in the last 3 years.
Mm.
And I was on a podcast with a veteran. And I was like, look, like, especially like for some of your listeners that have experienced like big T trauma,
Mm.
right? Like, I have a lot of trauma in my story. So for me, I couldn't thought work my way out. My nervous system was so dysregulated and I was living in fight or flight, freeze and fawn, like chronically. So I just learned like we have to go to the body first. We have to allow the body and the nervous system to like kind of come back into a calmer state. So I'm not dumping cortisol and adrenaline 24/7,
Mm.
right? And to create safety. And if I can create safety in my body first, it's going to then allow me access to that prefrontal cortex. So then I can, in that moment after failure, to have regulated my body, provided safety, then I can go to, okay, what are the facts of this? Not the
Yes.
stories that I'm
Yes.
believing. What are the facts? And what do I want to do with these facts?
Here's a question for you because I know we have very similar thinking on this. So let's play this game. Let's say I mean, we both worked enough clients to know that this comes up. What is in our head is a fact as far as our brain is concerned. But we both know from coaching clients when sometimes people say stuff out loud, we can identify. And this is not because we're special, Kim and I. This is because we're not in your brain,
Right,
right?
right.
In our brain, everything feels like reporting the news. This is a fact. Nothing is changeable. This is how it is. But I know just as another person, never mind a coach, we can sometimes see that like, no, 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 that's not a fact. That's your opinion on a circumstance. Like, um, how do you show people the difference between a neutral circumstance and like slash fact and their opinion? How do you break that apart for them?
Yeah, I love that question. Nobody's ever asked me that question. Um, that's why I didn't say truth. I
Mm,
didn't say what is the truth in this situation because truth is all subjective interpretation of reality.
mhm.
I said, what are the facts? So, facts are provable in a court of law, or all 8 billion people in the world will agree upon it.
Do you
And if
mean
it
my
can't,
schedule is so busy is not a fact? That's the one I get often is like, I have to finish this by this. My
yeah,
schedule.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can you prove that? Can you build a case on that and prove it in a court of law? No, you can't.
Yeah, or
You
would I
can't.
say is there someone who would look at your schedule and think that that was a nice day off,
Yep. It's
right?
subjective interpretation of reality. So anything that is
Mhm.
not a fact, provable in a court of law, or all 8 billion people will agree, is now subjective interpretation of reality. It is a story.
Yep.
So you can choose to believe that story, or you can choose, does that story serve you or not? Or we can go
Mhm.
to the facts and then just make a different decision. I personally, like, like you, I love science. So I love facts.
Mm.
So when I get pointed out, like this is a story, my brain automatically labels it a fairy tale. And like, why the hell am I believing in a fairy tale?
Especially if it's a hurtful one, right? It's so
Yeah.
weird when we choose to see that that is how we've conditioned our brain to think. Okay, so we experience a failure. We want to get more quick. We want to speed up the time amount it takes to start picking ourselves back up and feel that resilience. So we're in that failure. Our brain has started throwing a temper tantrum. One, break the state, get your body back into a more neutral state. We talked about ideas from that. Another one that I really love is sound baths. They're
Oh, yeah.
wonderful for that. Like different than meditation. I
Mhm.
Something to do with the frequency. I'm into the frequency lately. My clients have been laughing that I'm stepping my toe into the woo, but I mean it's working. And so I'm open to
Yeah.
like a little bit of everything. So we take our
Yeah.
body into a neutral state or a more neutral state to the point where we can access our brain. Then you're saying we go through there and ask ourselves, like, is this a fact? Step one, assess yes or no. What comes
Yeah.
next?
So we go into like, where are the facts in this, right? In this failure, like we're looking at this failure. Where are the facts? What do I want to do with this? What
Hmm.
decisions do I want to make?
Yeah. Like, do I want to keep this belief or not?
Well, yeah, yeah. Like if I'm looking at a failure, if I'm looking like a launch, let's use like a tangible example, right? Like I've done a launch, right? And like only 3 people signed up. So yeah, I'm first going to go to my nervous system regulation, right? Like whatever activities that is to like bring my body back into like that state. Um, Step two, I think, would be at that point is like to sit with the emotion. Dr. Taylor from Harvard showed that like if you will sit and acknowledge an emotion, like acknowledge it in your body, feel it in your body, it chemically only lasts for 90 seconds.
Is it that short? That's amazing. I've always heard 15 to 20 minutes, but like that's not actually based on anybody saying that. But 90 seconds.
90 seconds is how long the chemical
Dang.
wave reaction will last in your body. But what happens is when we don't do that, we're repeating the story and we're recreating the chemical reaction over and over and over again. But if we'll sit and acknowledge it and feel it, like it only lasts for 90 seconds.
Yeah, and I think
So,
to speak to that, I think that is such a key thing to sit with emotions. And a couple of episodes, we had a guest on, Hineen, and we talked about sitting in emotions relating to stress eating, which is this
oh, yeah.
theme is coming up of like what we as humans are missing the ability to do is handle our nervous system, direct our thinking, sit in emotion. It doesn't matter what the topic is. It's your business, it's failure, it's eating, it's a fight with your partner, it's your kids going crazy. Like it's this ability to sit in your feelings. And
Yes.
it's funny, I was coaching a client just on this yesterday, and I think this will be a good thing to speak on because I could sense hesitancy with him. And
Mhm.
that there was just this like, oh my God, sit in an emotion. And I love this question. What do you worried might happen?
Yeah.
And he said, I'm worried that I will become that feeling.
Yeah.
That idea that we will never escape. So I want to address this because I imagine if someone is listening to this, they're like, I don't want to sit in shame. Like, I don't, what if I spiral and can't get out? So I want you to speak to that on your experience of sitting in an emotion, what it actually is like. Will you get lost in it? What do you do if it's overwhelming? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm gonna share a story. I'm gonna answer your question, then I'm gonna share a
Yeah.
story. So sitting in an emotion for me now that I have that skill set, right? And like shame is one that like I'm very like shame toxic shame has been with me for a long time. So I'm very used to that emotion at this point. And it's like it literally is just like me sitting there and like I will close my eyes and I feel it like wherever I feel it in my body and I'll identify that and then I'll just invite it in. Like I'll say like, "Shame, you're welcome here.
Mm.
You're welcome to
Conversation with
expand."
it.
Yeah, like, "I see you, I hear you. You're welcome to expand inside of me."
Hmm. Hmm.
Because what we resist persists,
Hmm.
right? So when I'm welcoming it and just you're welcome to expand inside of me, and I promise you within that 90 seconds, I can just feel the relaxation in my body. I can feel the letting go of that emotion.
I love that you said it that way of inviting it in and allowing it to expand. Um, I'm going to offer the way I feel it because I think I would love to accumulate like a library of ways to let go of feeling, processes to do it because I think that's where we get stuck is like we're so in our heads, especially high
Mhm,
achievers, that it's very sometimes
mhm,
hard to what it is to feel. I know for
mhm.
me, I woke up this morning. I was telling Kim before we jumped on, I woke up from a nightmare of the fact that I couldn't figure out how to do a podcast interview. And I was like so stressed when I woke up and I felt instant anxiety. And I actually noticed that like I wasn't breathing and I had to like let it melt. It was almost a sensation of there was a tension that was running through my core and just to melt it, let it like
Yes.
start flowing. It was
Yes.
almost like I was blocking it into my chest and I had to just let it go like throughout the rest of my body, let
Yes.
it move how it needed to move. And so that's always my experience. As soon as I could tell like I'm holding my breath a little bit or I'm trying to like get rid of it by overthinking it or like
Yep.
you said your tendency to outact, I'm just going to go do stuff to get rid of
Yep.
it or
Yep.
I'm just going to, shove it down. Just let it like just what is it? Just let it be. It's always every time. And I've been doing this a while. It's never as scary as you think it's gonna be. I'm just like, I don't feel like being anxious today. And I'm like, that's resisting it right there is I don't feel like being anxious today. That's gonna make it persist all day long instead of spending, you
Yep.
said 90 seconds. How I even tolerate 10, 15 minutes at this point. If I'm like, you want to stick around for 10, 15 minutes so I can have my day back, let's go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's already created. It's
Mhm.
already there.
Mhm.
Why not just take 2 minutes to, and it's like a kid, right? It's like the way I like to look at it is like I split myself off, and that's my primal brain, that like little kid in me that it's expecting the adult in me to take care of it. And if I don't listen to it, it's going to start screaming louder and it's going to start throwing things, right? It demands to be seen and heard. So why can't I just be the adult for 2 minutes and just sit with that part of my brain, like, I hear you and I see you, and you are welcome to show up however you need to in this moment because you are safe with me and you are here with me. And then she quiets down because she's been seen and heard.
Yes. Right. And it's not like that pressure cooker building where you just keep like
Yes.
tamping it down, tamping it down.
Right.
Okay. So we are feeling the failure and we've decided we're going to break the nervous system out of what it
Yep.
is. Brain
Then
comes
we're
back
looking.
online. Is this a
Yep.
fact?
Yep.
Okay. Sit in the emotions. The emotion has moved through what now?
Yeah. Then we're like, the emotions move through and we're looking at it like, okay, where are the facts? Like, what happened?
Yeah.
Where are the facts and what happened? Now I'm going to make some decisions. What do I
Okay.
want to do with this? Where do I want to go from here?
And imagine making decisions from this place instead of the resistant shame feeling that we are probably operating from. That frequency is what you frequently see. If you
Yeah.
want to have your decisions create the results you want, you can't be making them from shame all the time. So it sounds like
Correct.
it's in this place now as we go forward. Where do we want to
Yes.
go from here?
Yes.
I
So then
love
we're
it.
intentionally deciding so we can create intentional actions,
Mhm.
blind actions. We're not doing reactive actions.
Yes. So how we talked a little bit earlier about redefining your relationship with failure. I'm curious to hear a couple of the conversations you have with failure and what some of these now beliefs that you are choosing to think. 'Cause I imagine that's part of the next step is like, hey, what are we going to think now about failure? Because it is going to happen again. So what are some of your go-to ways to reframe failure?
Yeah. Um, I love that first action in learning because
Yeah.
I love learning, right?
Mhm.
And for me, I know that if I'm not failing, then there's something going on that I'm hiding,
Oh, tell me more.
right? Because I mean, as entrepreneurs, like failing could be anything, right? Like an email that wasn't opened right, or like offers that weren't received. Like that is just, it's just the entrepreneurial journey. There is no black and white blueprint for any of us, no matter the industry, right? And so if I'm not failing, if I'm not getting what I want, like if I'm not putting offers out there and like not hearing anything, or I'm not getting the results I'm wanting on a daily, I know that I am just hiding in whatever emotion that I'm not processing and doing tasky shit.
Doing what? What is
Like
that?
tasky shit, like
Pesky
tasky
shit.
stuff, right? Like I'm over there like, well, I think the pencils need to be rearranged today. Like,
My office got a clean on the weekend. That was tasky shit. I love this. Okay, so So for you, the big reframe on that is if I'm not feeling this failure often enough, I'm not growing at a level that's going to get me where I want to go. It's that reframe of that. Sound right?
Yeah, and then I take responsibility for that, which is you are denying yourself the results you want. Are
How
you
do you
okay with
say
that?
that and not come from a place of shame? I'm just thinking from the audience mindset
Yeah.
because there's a lot of us
Yeah.
sitting in shame. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think how do I say that? I think I've gotten better at processing emotion more, and so I've moved away from shame and just honesty. Like, I'm not saying it in a way to myself to, like, shame myself into action. It's just me having a reality, like, conversation. Like,
Mhm.
taking responsibility for my life and taking responsibility for my results. And it's being taking that responsibility is like my result. I'm not creating the results I want, and that's totally okay if I'm
Mhm.
okay with that. And if
How do
I'm
you
not okay
become
with that,
Yeah. How do
good.
you become okay with that? That's another thing I think it's almost like a partner piece to all this is that ability to develop compassion, right? Because I
Mhm,
think like the more we have this conversation, and I love when I speak with experts like you because I'm reflecting on my own process, right?
mhm,
And I feel like there's a large part of it where my standards are exceptionally high. And because of that, I fail quite frequently. But I
mhm.
also roll right through it. And I'm not mad at myself for failing. I just continue forward. The conversation is very soft with myself. So, how do you
Yeah,
find
I,
that compassion piece in there really helps with the speed of that rejection resilience, like shortening that gap we talked about?
I think it's a critical component of it,
Mm.
right? Like if you don't have compassion for yourself, which that took me a long time to get there, sister. I would have coaches that would be like, "You need to have compassion." And I'm like, "If I have to fucking hear that one more time, I
That's
swear to
my
God."
point, right? Yeah, but like, okay, how did you do it? How did you create you said it was a long amount of time, which I think is important to hear. Like this is not something that you should be amazing at after your first attempt at it. It took you, it sounds like
Oh,
years. So
it took
how
me
did you do it?
years,
How'd you do it?
years. Um, I started working on my relationship to myself and like seeing myself. Um, I like it was easier for me to third person it, right? Like I said, that
Okay.
adult and that kid version of me. Like when I started looking at that, like those two versions, um, and I did this like arena exercise. This was pretty life changing for me because one time I had a coach tell me, I was telling her a story of where my first boyfriend in high school sexually assaulted me. And I was like, if I'd have been smarter and if I'd have been braver and if I'd have been tougher, that wouldn't have happened. Right. And she's like, you know what? She's like, you're sitting up in the stands judging that version of you.
Oh,
When
this is
it's
a
really easy
Brene
to
Brown thing
yeah, like
in
it's
the
really easy
arena.
to sit in those stands. Nothing's required of you. But she's the one that had a nervous system dysregulation. She's the one that had, oh, this makes me,
I just got chills. That's funny. We must have gotten the same thing at the
yeah.
same time there.
She's the one that had to make the decisions in the moment. She's the one that had to do what she had to do to survive. And you're going to sit up there and you're going to judge her? And I think for me, that was like the turning point for compassion for me. It was like all versions of me have always just done the best that she could with what she had and what she knew. And when she learned more and when she learned better, she did better.
Oh. And I know for you guys listening on the podcast, if you're not watching on YouTube, I wish you could see the 10 out of 10 belief in Kim's eyes when she says she did the best she could. Like the you that is guilting and shaming, sitting in the bleachers, heckling the version of you down there who's out there trying stuff. It's like, shut up. You don't get a say if you're not in the arena. And like, come on, like we wouldn't do that to each other. We're rooting on the people that are out there, trying things, putting themselves in risk of feeling negative feelings because they want that growth. I love the way you framed that.
And I think a lot of us entrepreneurs, maybe I'm wrong, you can tell me I'm wrong. Like I feel like we're warriors, right? And like we don't the idea of being a coward does not sit well. right? And so when I thought of that example, it was like, oh my God, like only cowards sit in the stands. And
Of
I'm
our
not going to
lives, like the
be,
sidelines of our lives.
yeah, I'm not going to be a coward. I will be the warrior, but I will not be the coward.
And this goes back to that 4 parts of building confidence that you said there's no feeling I'm not willing to feel, right? It's like your decision to, and I think this is a very big Brené Brown reference. I haven't read her books, but I've had clients that have brought her work to me repeatedly, that by getting in the arena and being willing to feel the things, knowing they are coming, but being willing to be soft with yourself for the sake of the life you want, the business you want, the growth you want, who you want to become. Oh, I think that's the one of the ways forward for us is to just really be
Sure.
like, do you want to watch your life happen or do you want to drive your life? Are you in the stands or are you in the
Right.
arena actually showing up? Because showing up
Yeah.
is going to have failure. It's
Yeah.
going to require you to develop rejection resilience.
Yes. Yes. For
Rejection
sure.
resilience almost is like holding yourself and space for yourself while you're in the arena.
Yes. I love the way you said that.
Oh, that's so good. I love this so much. I think this is going to be so helpful. Okay, last thing I want to tie this into is this other thing that I know clients deal with all the time is perfectionism.
Hmm.
How does that tie into all of this?
I have an unpopular opinion on this.
I feel like
So
most of my opinions are unpopular. I think that's
yeah,
what makes good content.
yes. I do not believe perfectionism is a personality trait. So it drives me nuts when people, like my clients, are like, well, I'm just a perfectionist. Like, that's not a personality trait. That is a coping mechanism from childhood that was only meant for childhood that you have now drug into adulthood. Same for people pleasing. There's 11 of them, actually. Yeah. So I love looking at it that like that. Like, oh, this is a childhood coping mechanism. Like perfectionism is like in your family system as children, we're super vulnerable, right? Like we need our caretakers to take care of us. Cause if they take us as 2 year olds and put us out in the woods, we're gonna die within 48 hours, 72 hours, right? We can't find food, water, or shelter. So my little brain that's wired for survival is going to figure out in this family system, what do I need to do to make sure that these caretakers love me and want to keep me? And some family systems demand perfectionism. That I just like I do things perfectly and then mom and dad are happy when I don't make mistakes or when I get my 4.0, like they're happy, they want to keep me. Well, that's only meant for the era of your life when you can't take care of yourself. When you can take care of yourself, you can feed yourself, you can clothe yourself, you can find shelter. Like it's not effective anymore. All it does is hinder us in our lives.
Yeah, for sure, right? Because then we hold these standards to ourselves. And I think there's that shame cycle every time we don't meet those standards. Is it because we don't have rejection resilience developed? And then we go through this like everything has to be perfect. I don't meet it. I can't handle my thoughts and feelings and my what it feels like to fail. And so I then beat myself up with shame, which is another layer of negativity. Does that sound kind of like,
Yeah.
am I putting it together
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's some wounds, like some childhood wounds that have not been looked at. Like a lot of this work, I think for all of us, especially as entrepreneurs, is we're going to have to go do some of the childhood work to like look at that, those childhood wounds. Like why do you think you need to be perfect? Why do things need to be perfect? What does it mean about you when things are perfect? And what does it mean about you when things are not perfect?
Hmm. So do you think creating rejection resilience, as we've talked about today, is a tool that is helpful if someone is self-identifying as a perfectionist, even though we've now said maybe that's actually just a coping mechanism, not a personality trait, is rejection resilience a solid tool to help with
Yes. We have to acquire it,
yeah.
right? Like it is a tool that we're going to have to acquire because we're going to have to fail and there is going to be rejection, right? And the more that we can like hone that tool, hone that muscle,
Hmm.
the easier like the more confident we become and the easier rejection becomes and the faster we can move in our entrepreneurial journey.
Oh, I love this. I think this has brought this right round beautifully. And I know that at the beginning you said, like if we're talking about serotonin, it's that two-thing approach. It's one, you have to balance it physically. And for that, I have 120 something other episodes where you can go and sleep. You could talk about what to eat. You could talk about your exercise. But I thought today was a beautiful addition in looking at how to help your own mind transition through that, because I think both of them are necessary.
Yeah.
Anything you'd add from what we talked about, anything that you feel like we might have missed?
Yeah. I'll just add like tangible, like an example, right? Before I had rejection resilience, so everything was being filtered through what I was making it mean about me, right? And so I didn't want to fail because I didn't want it to mean that I was a failure, right? And then when I did fail or things or rejection happened, it was devastating and it would take me days and days. And right. And then the willingness to fail got shorter and shorter. So when I started doing this work and like healing my inner child, and I started learning how to regulate my nervous system and how to process emotions, right? And how to start like managing my mind. And I started that, which then healed my body, and my serotonin was then balanced. Rejection, my resilience to rejection and failure increased. So what that actually translated as is like things are just not really a problem anymore. Right? Like if somebody doesn't like sign up with me, or nobody opens my emails or whatever, like my brain doesn't make it a problem anymore. It doesn't see it as failure. It doesn't see it as rejection anymore like it used to. It just sees it like, okay, that just didn't go the way that I thought it would go. How do I need to pivot?
A
What do
data
I,
point.
this is, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it's a data point. It's not personal anymore. And so now I have so much resilience to these things.
Yeah, I think that actually ties this episode up beautifully, because it is, we talked about where you are at the beginning. We talked about how to walk through, and now we talked about where we are. Like what is it that we are aiming to? And I think the word that kept coming up in my head as you were talking is freedom.
Yes.
Not obsessing about the process of fixing it anymore, which at the beginning you might be a little more focused on it. Not obsessing about the negativity and the failure. It is just letting go. It's a lack of attachment to the
Yes.
result, because it is just a data point for you to make a future decision with.
Yes. Beautifully said.
Awesome. All right, Kim, where can my audience find you if they want to hear more about your work, what you do? They want to listen to you talk about all this stuff more. Where can I send them?
You're so sweet. So you can find me at KimberlyJarmanCoaching.com. I have a podcast with Dr. Carmen, Thrive and Align Healing. It's on my website. You can also find me on social media at Kimberly Jarman Coaching Instagram, or on TikTok, where I love to be, at Kimberly Jarman.
Cool. I'll make sure all those links are in the description so they're easily clickable for you guys. Well, Kim, thank you. I
Thank
love this.
you.
I thank you for letting me ask you the deep questions and dig around in all of this, for sharing your life experience. I've loved having you on today. So thank you so much.
This has been an amazing. I love being your guest. This was fantastic.
Awesome. All right, you guys, have a beautiful week, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Want to know more about the Becoming Limitless program? Everything you need to know is linked in the description. You can head to my website at tanessashears.com to learn all about the program. Or if you're not ready to work together yet, you can check out my free podcast, Becoming Limitless. It's the go-to podcast for entrepreneurs who want to optimize their brain and their body with biohacks.